Today on the Rise of the Challenge podcast.
What I finally figured out at 26, I got in a tough car accident. My father died in a car accident when he was 28. And so I'm 26. I was 2 when he died. But I was 26. I got in my own tough car accident, and that's a whole nother story. But I had this existential crisis, quarter-life crisis of what am I going to do? What is the meaning of life? What am I going to do with my life? And so I had to kind of face all those regrets in advance.
Welcome to the Rise of the Challenge podcast. Joined today, he's the CEO of Next Level University, business coach and podcast host. It's Alan Lazaros. How you doing today, Alan?
I am doing very well. Rise to the Challenge is a hell of a name for a podcast, so I'm excited.
We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what you like doing growing up.
Okay, very beginning. Where I'm from Uxbridge, Massachusetts in the US. And what did I like doing growing up? I was big into basketball. I was big into snowboarding. I loved video games early on, and I've always been extremely engineering oriented, even though at the time I didn't realize that.
With basketball and snowboarding, two completely different areas. Did you kind of prefer the extreme side of snowboarding, but kind of the teamwork aspect with basketball?
I think it was probably more the extreme side of both. In my youth, I used to say, I don't do anything in moderation. I'm very obsessive and very extreme. So I kind of dial everything up to 11 is sort of the joke. And I now understand some of the reasons why that is. Tough childhood adversity, we're going to get into it. But at the time, I just felt very obsessive in comparison to my peers. I am still to this day very obsessive. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually a really good thing, as long as you choose positive things. Because if you choose negative things, being obsessive is not good. And I have a journey with alcohol where I was also obsessed with partying, and that was a dark time for me. So I think obsessiveness, all of us have it. I think it's important. And I think that as long as we channel it towards positive endeavors, I think it can be a really good thing.
Do you have any fond memories of the sports side? Was there a moment that you remember quite a bit?
Yeah, ski club was awesome.
Okay.
I did ski club, and every single Wednesday night during the winters, we would all go to the mountain, Wachusett Mountain in Massachusetts, and we did night skiing. And I used to snowboard and ski. I skied ever since I was 4 years old, and then I snowboarded. And I actually haven't done a lot of it since. So since I was 26, the last 9 years, I haven't done much snowboarding. But I used to just adore it, and I'm definitely going to have to get back into it because I have many fond memories on the mountain for sure.
That's something I wish I did a lot more of. We have in Missouri, we have like the fake snow resort area because either it's sunny outside or it's snow. So they have to create the fake snow. And there's like a resort like 20 minutes from me. I wish I did that more. And now I'm going to write that down and be like, yeah, I need to go do that more. Because I only been skiing in Colorado, the hot spot of that winter sports, but need to do more of it because it's fun. You talked about the upbringing that you've had. Was there any big inspiration or someone that motivated you as you were growing up?
Yeah, so I had a bunch of heroes actually, but in hindsight, it's fascinating. Early on, I never used to talk about this, but I do now, even though it's vulnerable to share. I now playfully refer to my upbringing as the Boulevard of Broken Dreams. I grew up in an environment that was very suburban, very blue collar, for lack of better phrasing, and there wasn't a lot of personal development. There wasn't a lot of personal growth. There wasn't a lot of dreams or goals or aspirations. It wasn't a very well-educated area. And in hindsight, I'm 35 years old now, even though I look 15. I'm hoping to hit puberty at 36. You know what I mean? So people ask me, well, how did you age so well? Just never hit puberty. That's my secret. So, but I'm 35 now, and I always rewatch the movie of my own life, metaphorically, but also kind of literally in my own memory. I have a good memory. And I try to re-understand it from a higher sense of awareness. So if you've ever seen a movie as a kid and then you rewatch it as an adult,
Yep.
and you go, oh, I never understood. Oh, okay, got it. All right, interesting. I always use Finding Nemo as a reference for that because I saw it when I was a kid. We rode our bikes to the movie theater, and I've seen it since, and it's just even better. But anyways, so I reflect on this now, and I realize that I had tons of heroes. The Rock was one of them for sure. Steve Jobs was one of them. And I grew up without a father, and I didn't have a lot of male role models, so I was kind of searching for that unconsciously. And I had several once I found the personal development industry. The Tony Robbins and the Wayne Dyer and the Darren Hardy and that kind of stuff. And then eventually you grow up and you learn and you grow and you become more and more of who you really are. And then you kind of realize that basically every hero you've ever had is deeply flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is just my experience, but I've had dozens of coaches and mentors. And honestly, in many ways, I think I've outgrown them. And even that is hard to share. But there's always that moment with a mentor where it's like, oh, okay, all right, I think this is probably the end of that mentor-mentee relationship, and now we're going to be more peers. And that's always painful, but necessary. And so, yeah, I looked up to a lot of people. So the notable one that's been the most through line throughout my life was Steve Jobs. I remember being in macroeconomics class at my college, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and I saw his Stanford address, 2005 Stanford address, and after that, I just got up, walked out of class, and I was like, I'm done. I'm done with this. I'm going to go start a company. And I did. I started a company called Campus Libre with some classmates of mine. And I've since started a couple companies, and now I'm at Next Level University. But that was kind of the beginning of, I think I'm going to do the entrepreneur thing. And I think I'm supposed to be an entrepreneur. And I think I'm supposed to start something. And that was kind of my answering the call, so to speak. And then, over time you learn, you study, and there's many wonderful things about Steve Jobs, but there's also many very not so great things. And now I don't like to associate necessarily with him or not. But what I do know is I had tons of heroes. All of them have fallen from the pedestal, quite frankly. And not in a bad way, but more in like I don't really look up to people anymore. I kind of look across. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's part of maturing.
Having those coaches, heroes, mentors at those specific times, do you feel that there was a reason why you needed them at that moment, and how over time they've kind of not been at the coach at that time or the hero at the time because you didn't follow in those footsteps, but there was a specific reasoning. Like if someone is trying to be a next NBA player, they're looking up to an NBA athlete. But then once they reach the NBA, maybe that person's not there anymore. They're now looking at a different mentor for a specific different reasoning.
So for me, this has been really fascinating to understand. And a lot of these things are actually fairly unique to me, but I was always looking unconsciously. I think so. I didn't have a father growing up. My father passed away when I was 2 years old, and I had a stepfather from age 3 to 14. And so, and my stepfather and I never really connected or got along. And I now kind of understand that more now too. But I think unconsciously, I was looking for a male role model.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I actually, I looked up to a lot of different people, mostly male. And only in hindsight do I realize that. But yes, in hindsight, there was always a reason. And even Steve Jobs, he talks about the quote of, you can't connect the dots looking forward, but you can always connect them looking backwards. And it becomes clear as time goes on. Two things have become very clear. One, there was always a reason. And two, even though I didn't understand it at the time, the thing that I needed to learn from them was both the warning and the example.
Mm-hmm.
So they were an example in something I admired, but there was a warning that came with it. And I now understand that every strength comes with an inherent weakness. Every strength comes with an inherent blind spot. So, for example, if self-belief is a strength, then arrogance is the weakness. Because if you're super confident, that's a great strength. But if you're overconfident, then you're arrogant. So you need humility to balance that out. And so, yes, in hindsight, there was something I needed to learn from everybody, but usually it was actually the warning I needed more than the example, which has been interesting. And then the last piece is I always overcooked the turkey, man. I always stayed too long. I had the answer. I knew that I had learned what I needed to learn and I needed to move on, and I just never moved on quick enough. And I think that actually comes down to a deeper part of my journey, the adversities we talked about at the beginning. But by the time I was 14 years old, in many ways, I kind of lost three full families. And that's kind of a story within itself. But now I understand that because I had so much abandonment in my childhood, my stepdad leaving at 14, taking his whole family with him, my mom and my mom's sister got in a big fight right around that same time. And so we sort of got ostracized from her side of the family. And then on top of that, my birth father's side of the family, we didn't really spend a lot of time with in those first 14 years because we were sort of pretending that my stepdad was my real dad. And I didn't know any of this at the time. Like I said, I've rewatched the movie of my life, done a lot of therapy, things like that. And my real last name is actually McCorkle. Lazarus is my stepfather's last name. His name is Steve Lazarus. And yeah, I didn't understand any of this back then, but I think I had coaches, mentors. I've always been insatiably curious. I've always wanted to understand everything. I always joke, I don't want to know, I need to know. And I would always ask tons of questions to everybody. What I didn't understand was happening is because I'm acting like a student, everyone assumes I'm a student.
Mm-hmm.
Now I understand the sort of power dynamics of relationships and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I was just a naive, try to learn everything from everyone type of person. And I didn't realize what that does to, if you're always looking like a student, people will always think you're a student versus someone who actually has answers. And what's ironic is when you are a student for 35 years, you end up with more answers than the mentors who are always, yeah. And that's the fascinating thing. And so I always overcooked the turkey. I always stayed too long. And I think it came from some deep abandonment stuff. And I wanted to kind of keep relationships in my life. And that's been a theme for sure. I've always kept relationships longer than I should have in hindsight. That's been a very clear weakness for me.
You talked about in college a change in path that you went on when it came to your entrepreneurial journey. But that fun question we're sometimes asked growing up is, what is that dream job that we were always wanting? When you were growing up, what was that dream job that if you could, you would have done?
So I had a bunch. I actually am writing a blog right now. I have a blog on my LinkedIn that has 14 articles. I do them every other week. And this one blog is about success and what it really takes. And it's the 5 S's of success. It's sacrifice, struggle, suffer, success, and sustain. And success is the fourth one. And then even once you get it, you still have to sustain it, right? So, and that's kind of the theme of Next Level University. Once you get to the next level, you have to now sustain that and then figure out how to get to the next level. And so these courageous moments just keep coming at you. It's actually quite brutal. So anyone who thinks climbing mountains is easy is in trouble. But anyways, so to answer your original question, I had a bunch. I'm writing this blog right now that goes through all of it. And what I didn't understand, and this is really important, I always had a lot of self-belief. I didn't struggle with self-doubt. I didn't think I couldn't do it. As a matter of fact, my whole life I've been like, of course you can. Like, I remember a friend of mine, well, I want to be a famous actor. And one day, and I said, of course you can do it. And I ended up moving to LA for a time, actually with him later on. That was a sophomore in high school. And in our early 20s, we actually did that. And he didn't end up becoming a famous actor. And that always bothered me. And the reason why I now understand is he just doesn't believe in himself. But when you have high self-belief, you don't know that other people don't. Because they'll come up to you and they say, oh my God, look what you did. And it's like, oh, well, I said I was going to do that. They'd be like, oh my God, you did it. Well, if you're so surprised that I did what I said I would do, obviously you didn't believe me.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this massive blind spot that came in my life. And so as a kid, I had all these dreams, so many. I considered professional snowboarding. I didn't grow up on a mountain, so that was kind of out. I was a semi-pro gamer, considering pro gaming. That was a genuine possibility for sure. I considered the basketball path. This is going to sound a little crazy, but this is my truth. I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, and there's a bunch of others. Abercrombie model, I actually did some modeling. So some of these dreams I've decided not to do. Some of them I decided to try and then canned. Some of them I really actually accomplished. But what I would say is I've never not decided in advance whether to do it or not. I never like stumbled upon success or anything like that. So engineer, I decided to do. So when I was a sophomore in college, I was really contemplating my career, and I've always been super long-term thinking. I've always been a reverse engineer, even when I didn't know it. And I've always had high self-belief, but again, I didn't know any of that. So forgive anyone who's listening who struggles with self-doubt. You're going to want to villainize me a little bit right now. And I understand, but genuinely just try not to do that and try to learn the concept That's all I'll say about that. All right. So there's two types of self-belief. And I never knew any of this until recently. The first one is how much you believe in your ability to actually do the behavior. The second one is how much you believe in your ability to figure out which behaviors to do. The good analogy here is I might sound arrogant when I say I can make the best chicken marsala, but it's not arrogant to say that when you have the best recipe.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a mathematical scientific thinker, math always came very easy to me. I actually can reverse engineer finish lines very well. And because of that, I would always say, like, oh, yeah, you could totally do that. Because the truth is, you could. You can't do it in 5 days, but in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, like, you totally can. And so, when I said we'd start a successful podcast, people thought I was nuts. And now we have a successful podcast. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe. And in my head, it's like, well, obviously, you didn't think I was really going to do it. And I now understand most people are saying stuff without actually contemplating what that means and, you know, everything that comes with it and all that kind of stuff. And so here's my point. My dreams growing up, I had all these different ones. And when I was a sophomore in high school, I actually had this conversation with myself, inside myself. And I never shared it because I already felt like a weirdo. I was also bullied in high school for sure. I decided, I remember thinking to myself, I want to do lawyer, politician, president, or I want to do engineer, or no, I want to do engineer, master's in business, CEO of a tech company. I wanted to be a CEO of a tech company like Steve Jobs, Apple. And so that was my choice. And I remember I did a mock law court case for the class law I was in, and I dressed in a full suit with my buddy Ryan, and my business partner Kevin, who's been on this show, actually was in that class, which is wild. And he was on the jury, and we lost. And I remember after that, I decided not to be a lawyer.
Oh,
yeah. Little did we know, right? It blew my mind because we did a really good job, and the jury still went the other way. And they convicted this woman of first-degree murder when in reality it was actually manslaughter because it was a woman who was pregnant and she did drugs while she was pregnant. That was my client, my mock client. But the point is that after that, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the engineer route. And it sounds crazy, like lawyer, politician, president. You really think you could be president? And this is something I never used to share because I was too scared to share it. But yes, I did believe that authentically. As a kid, I was like, yeah, I could do that. I was born in the US, right? I could make that work. I born into adversity, figured it out. It's all a thing. Now, here's my point. I decided not to do that. And I remember I was on an interview all these years later. There's a man named Evan Carmichael, who's a friend of ours, and he interviewed us. We actually interviewed him in Toronto, and he's a big YouTuber. He's the top 10 YouTuber guy. Yeah.
no.
Top 10. Yeah. Top 10 rules for success. That's Evan Carmichael. He's a friend of ours, and we produce his podcast. But anyway, so I'm talking to him, interviewing him, and he thinks long-term strategic thinking is dumb. And I had this conversation with him, and I was like, well, he's like, well, long-term strategic thinking is dumb. You can't predict 10 years from now. I was like, Evan, I can. Like, he's like, you didn't decide to do all this. And I said, yeah, we did. And so anyways, I didn't want to, call him out on his own channel. So I kind of was docile. But at the end of the day, he said, if you can predict 10 years from now, then you should be president. And in my head, I actually had this moment of, Evan, I decided not to be president. I decided not to go for that. And so again, I don't want anyone to villainize me here, especially people who struggle with self-doubt. They usually can't fathom something like that. But the real lesson in all of this is I had all these huge goals and dreams, but they weren't the playful, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up goals and dreams. They were like I genuinely am considering and reverse engineering this and deciding in advance to sacrifice whatever I need to get to the top of that mountain. And I now understand that most people, when they're saying their dreams as a kid, they really are just talking about what they wish would happen or what they would like to happen, but without actually looking at all the steps from here to the top of that mountain, so to speak.
As you're saying that, it's kind of like when you look back at that time, like reflecting on it. Like you mentioned, we're all saying what we want to do, but none of us have really taken the steps to, okay, how am I going to get there? What's the plan going to look like? I think mine when I was growing up was to be a game show host. I don't know how I was going to get there, but I was going to get there in some way. Now,
Nice.
I'm kind of hosting in a way, but not a game show. But did I ever think I was going to be here on this platform? Back then, no. But getting there has been worth the journey. You mentioned a big moment about drinking, partying, that kind of scene. What was that experience like, and how did that play a big directory in your future?
Yeah, so I call it push and pull. And I say everyone needs to push themselves to stay in the pull. And what I mean by that is I think we all have a calling and a conscience and an intuition. And I think that we all are supposed to follow that. And I used to drown mine in alcohol. And so instead of answering the call and having courage, I just drank. And I was fun, high school friends, college friends, corporate friends. It was just my whole world was being too much for everybody, nothing for myself. I had too many friends, too many colleagues, too many parties, too many obligations and commitments, and I was just kind of lost. And I had this intuitive calling my whole life to, like I said, even as a kid, I wanted to build something significant. I wanted to change the world. And I've always had that call. I've always had that quote of the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And I do think that's unique. I think we all should be changing the world and making the world a better place in our own unique way. And then some of us are climbing smaller mountains, some of us are climbing Mount Everest. I, ever since a kid, always felt like I had to climb Mount Everest and do something that's never been done. Maybe that's unique to me. Please don't villainize me. Here's my point. I used to drink because I grew up in an environment that I used to call it, so I now refer to this part of my life as boats and bullshit. My stepfather had motorcycles and snowmobiles, and we had a yacht, and we went on vacations and ski trips and all kinds of stuff. And it wasn't all bad. Uh, it definitely wasn't all good. My mom and stepdad didn't get along well. They never missed an opportunity to party. And when my stepdad left at 14, it was just me and my mom. My older sister had moved out at that stage, and there was a lot of partying. There was a lot of partying, and I grew up. And I didn't know this at the time, but now I understand the paradigm. I grew up in a pleasure-centered paradigm. What a pleasure-centered paradigm means is we all have this sort of unconscious belief of what we think the purpose of life is. So people think, there's a work-centered paradigm. Those are like the quote unquote workaholics of the world. They believe life is all about work and their career. The family-centered paradigm, that's very common. Life is all about family. Everything's your family, right? And I don't agree with that either, but that's not my paradigm. Of course it's not, right? Given the family I grew up in. And then there's achievement paradigm. Everything's about achieving, achieve, even though it's sometimes empty. Okay. And then what I finally figured out at 26, I got in a tough car accident. My father died in a car accident when he was 28. And so I'm 26. I was 2 when he died. But I was 26. I got in my own tough car accident, and that's a whole nother story. But I had this existential crisis, quarter life crisis of what am I going to do? What is the meaning of life? What am I going to do with my life? And so I had to kind of face all those regrets in advance. And I realized I grew up in a pleasure-centered paradigm where everything was about fun. I call it boats and bullshit. And even though it was never really true to me, and after I was successful from the outside in, I focused on achievement, often at the expense of my core values and my fulfillment. But I was always an achiever. That's one thing that's always been the case. Just always been an achiever. And now I switched into what's called a growth paradigm, meaning everything I am and everything I do, the filter in which I see the world and behave in the world is all through growth. And anyone who's listening to this right now knows that. For the last 9 years, to say I'm obsessed with personal growth is laughable at this stage. I just adore getting better. And we have a whole company built on holistic self-improvement, health, wealth, life, and love. And my whole world is how do we become better? I have it written in the corner of my office. You are here to maximize your own unique potential and to help others do the same. Everything else is secondary. And that's my message to myself, from my highest self to my human self. And so that's what I do. That's all I do. Whether it's group coaching or one-on-one coaching or podcasts or YouTube, whatever it is, it's always that. How do I help everyone uniquely maximize their own growth and their own contribution? Yes, for a profit, for a better quality of life. And I've designed my whole world around that. And so anyone who's still in a friend paradigm or a family paradigm or a fun, pleasure-centered paradigm. I just don't really vibe with those people anymore. And that's where I grew up. And so the drinking problem, I think, more than anything, was me trying to fit in where I never really did. And again, at the time, I didn't know that. I just used alcohol to dial me down. I mean, you can tell I'm an intense guy. I never really have a different gear. This is me. This is the real me. And I don't want another gear. I want to work every day for the rest of my life. I know that's weird, but that's who I am. I'm mission-centered growth. I want to maximize my potential. And my business partner Kevin always jokes. He's like, "Alan, no one cares about that." And and I'm to me, how could you not want to maximize your potential, right? To me, that's everything. But again, I'm weird. And so alcohol used to dial all that down so that I could get along with people. And that goes hand in hand with this realization that I stayed in relationships way longer than I should have because I was basically just diluting who I really am, wondering why I'm unfulfilled. And alcohol was kind of my way of doing that. But I also grew up in an environment that encouraged that a lot. So that definitely didn't help.
Has the change with alcohol changed over time, or is it still when that moment in time still occurs, or is there a difference nowadays?
So for a long time, I often playfully joke about this. It took me 5 years to quit drinking. When I was 26, got in that car accident, decided to start trying to quit drinking. And I remember at one point, it's funny because I don't struggle a ton with self-doubt, but with drinking, I did. When it came to, am I not going to drink at my own wedding? It felt like impossible to me. It felt like unfathomable to me. And this is like Mr. Self-belief. Why do I have so much self-doubt around this, right? And so that was so weird for me. It's like, am I really going to be able to do that? So, anyways, fast forward, fast forward, fast forward. I'd try to quit drinking, I'd fall off. I'd try to quit drinking, I'd fall off. And weddings were my kryptonite. Now I know why. I didn't understand this at the time, but we go to a wedding, right? And the only thing any of us have in common at this wedding is we all knew this couple at some point.
Yeah.
So the social anxiety is just through the roof because it's a bunch of paradigms all in one place and open bar. So what do? You drink to fix the social anxiety. And so now I understand why, but at the time I didn't. One would turn into two, two would turn into four, four would turn into eight, and I always had a blast. It's not like I was a bad person or anything. I just, I just would fall off the wagon over and over again, and the next day I'd be hungover. I'd be like, "Damn, it happened again," and then guilt and shame. It was just an awful relationship that I had with alcohol. And so eventually I just kept on the personal growth journey. I kept trying, kept trying, kept trying. And there was this one, I actually wrote about this recently. There was this one day I was in Westerly, Rhode Island. It was my grandmother and grandfather on my birth father's side, their 60th anniversary, wedding anniversary. And there was this big sort of lobster cookout thing. My aunt, rented a whole Airbnb house on the beach. And I took a shot of tequila and I had a tequila sunrise in my hand. I was headed into the car. It was a warm summer day, just beautiful. And, the whole strip. And it felt like just me. And I had this is June 29th, 2019. Before COVID, before all that. I remember feeling like I could hear partying in the distance. It was a very pleasant experience. I was super present. And I remember being like, this is over now. I remember feeling a little bit of buzz and I remember feeling like icky about it. It wasn't the same. It wasn't what it used to be. It used to be like a release of, oh, finally present. Okay. This feels so good. This time it felt like, ugh, this is not good. And I took my solo cup and I dumped it out on the corner of a little white picket fence outside the house by myself. And I knew that was it. I knew that was the last time I'd ever drink. And now I could ask SIRI. I don't want to say it out loud, but I could ask SIRI how many days it's been. I think it's, I don't know, 4 years or 4.5 years or something like that. But I used to count the days. I had the days tracked in a Google spreadsheet for years. And then eventually it was like, I don't think I have to track this anymore. I'm never going to drink again. So, and my girlfriend quit too. And I nothing against people who drink. What I will say is for me, it was always an escape. It was always an escape. And if you don't feel that way, that's fine. But I'm just really grateful that I did it. And obviously physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, it's definitely better for me. And so now I stay hydrated and I feel more fit. So it's good.
Leaning into you mentioning being physically fit, health and fitness has been a journey that you've been on, and people that follow you on social media platforms see that journey that you've been on with physical activity. How has that played a big role in your daily outlook and your daily process with gym, fitness, mental health, all those aspects?
So when I was, before my car accident, when I was 25, 26, I remember I was at the movies with a friend of mine, college roommate of mine. His name is Manu. And we were watching the Superman film. I think this is back in like 2015. But Henry Cavill, I think, is the name of this guy, the actor. And I worked for a company called Cognex back then. I was doing really well in corporate and I was making lots of money, but I was still drinking and I was not happy, not fulfilled. And I'll never forget this. I was drinking Mountain Dew and I had Captain Morgan in it. And we had gone to dinner, we had some drinks, and then, I went to the movies, drinking at the movies, and not my best life. But I remember there was a scene where he got out of the lake. And if you remember the movie, you'll remember the scene. But Superman essentially falls into a lake, gets out of the lake, he's shirtless. And Henry Cavill is just the peak of male perfection, basically, in this movie. And I remember I remember having this horrible, it was such a mirror for me. Because deep down, I think I knew I was capable of, I knew I was capable of more, and I knew I was letting it ride. And we all know that. We all know when we're letting it ride. And I was so upset. So I pretended to have to go to the bathroom. And I got up and I went into the bathroom and I just looked in the mirror. And it was one of those just life-changing days for me where I looked in the mirror and I was so sad. I was just this frail, tall, skinny, lanky, sort of skinny fat, 160 pounds, just semi-alcoholic. It just was a bad look. It wasn't, I just had that moment of, am I ever going to be like that? Could I ever be fit like that? And I actually poured out the Mountain Dew and I started going to the gym after that. Wow. And I didn't stick with it, unfortunately, until after my car accident. So this is like kind of pre-car accident, but I do remember that being a moment for me where I was never the same after that. I felt the pain and I actually gave myself the chance to be vulnerable and really look in the mirror honestly and just say, you know what? Highest self talking to human self, you are not proud of you. You are capable of so much more and you know it. And I think that's what envy really is. Envy, as long as it's apples to apples and it's not someone else's social media compared to your real life, I think envy is, hey, sometimes it's just envy, but I think it's your soul saying, hey, you're capable of more and you know it. If you see a couple that's deeply in love and you're envious, that's your soul saying you want to go find your partner too. You want to go find your person too. And Emilia and I struggled in intimate relationships for 30 years. And Emilia and I didn't meet her until I was 30. Our relationship is so good that I'm actually scared to talk about it because of how good it is. We've never fought. It's been 4.5 years. When she said we're never going to fight, I was like, that's impossible. Don't we want to be together forever? And we never have. It's wild. It's unbelievable. And that's a whole nother story. We have a podcast together. We help couples. We've been coaching couples for 3 years, married people on the brink of divorce. It's a whole thing. But the point is my relationship is so magnificent. I couldn't even describe it to you if I tried. It's unreasonable. It is storybook level to the point where I would have thought I was full of shit when I was younger, because everyone was like, well, you'll know when you find your person. It's like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Right. I'm an engineer, so I need to know like the ones and the zeros of the whole thing. How does this work? Right. And people are like, oh, you'll know when you know. It's like, yeah, that's true. Now that's true. Back then I was like, what are you talking about? Little did I know I was in relationships that I definitely didn't know. Right. So, but anyways, to bring this full circle with the fitness journey, after my car accident, after that movie theater moment, I knew I needed to do something. I knew that fitness mattered to me. I was bullied in high school. I obviously look really young. I was this tall, lanky, skinny. First I was prepubescent, then I was tall, lanky, skinny, and I never got taken very seriously by men. I never felt like I was taken seriously by anyone, to be honest with you. And I knew I needed to change that. One more quick story. I actually got jumped in the Providence Place Mall. I'm going to give this a quick one, but this was where it really turned around after me. This is after my car accident. I was in the Providence Place Mall with my friend Kiki, and there was a schizophrenic there who didn't take his medication, and he just jumped us. And we got beat. Well, so I ran like a coward, and my best friend Kiki got beaten the crap out of. He just stayed there. It's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. He froze. I flight, because when we were kids, when we heard a coyote in the woods, we would run. So I thought he was going to run too. And I decided after that, I said, you know what? There's nothing I can do about that. We weren't at the bar. We weren't drinking. Your brain tries to figure out, like, what did I do wrong? Could I do something differently? At least that's what my brain does. And the only conclusion I could draw is if that ever happens again, I'm going to be ready. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be capable. And I just went on this massive fitness transformation, and I became a fitness model, and I became a fitness competitor and a fitness coach, and my whole world was fitness. And I actually won fitness shows. I've got the trophy behind me, and I was in just unreasonably good shape. It was honestly awesome. And anyone who tries to tell you being in shape isn't awesome, it's the best thing in the entire world. It's the best thing. Take it from someone who's been massively out of shape and someone who's been like top 1% of 1% of 1% in shape. It's the best thing in the world. I did a triathlon on a whim. I did a marathon on a whim. I just love being physically capable. And so I think we all have a responsibility to eat well and to sleep well and to hydrate well. And so I have the 7 pillars of fitness. I'll give them to you real quick. These are, think of like a pyramid. The very bottom, I'm going to go from the bottom up. And I was fitness coach for many years, so this is what I help my clients with. Sleep, hydration, nutrition, training, mobility, breath work, and supplementation. So sleep, quality, quantity; hydration, how much and how often; nutrition, macros, micros, calories; training, which is weight training, HIIT training, cardio, that kind of thing; mobility, which is stretching, pliability, foam rolling, that kind of thing; joints, ligaments, tendons. And then you've got 2 more, which is breath work, and that's just diaphragmatic breathing, making sure that you're breathing properly while in the gym, making sure you're taking deep breaths. Obviously, I haven't been on this podcast. I've been talking so much. And then the last one is supplementation. And unfortunately, most people overly focus on supplementation because the whole fitness industry, that's the only thing that makes money. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the first 6, don't worry about the 7th one. Maybe it's the next supplement that'll do it. But at the end of the day, I hope that everyone just maximizes their physical health, because there's nothing better than waking up in the morning, feeling good, looking good, being empowered. And I used to be this frail shell of this man that you see in front of you now. And my girlfriend Emilia and I, very last thing is someone reached out to her and said, hey, I'm going to do an 80-day challenge. And I said, sweetheart, that person is not going to do that. They're just talking. Because I was sick and tired of people talking and not walking. I see it everywhere. I see it all around me. Leading by example is one of my most important core values. And I said, let's do it. Let's actually do it. I know that person's not going to do it. How about they try 3 days before they start talking smack about 80 days? I said, let's do it. I said, my old best is 3.5 months. And I want to beat my old best. I just want to better my old best. I'm like, let's go for 4 months. Let's do 120 days in a row of exercise. I said, nothing crazy, do 30 minutes a day. So we created something called the NLU Fit Pick Challenge. And she has a company called Evolve Ventures. And so Team Evolve Moves was her part of it. And we did it together. And that was March 1st of 2022. And I eventually surpassed 4 months, and it was like, okay, now what? And then we surpassed a year, and it was like, okay, now what? And so now we're coming up on 2 years. I actually think we might have passed 2 years. I think last I checked was 7/18. I have it all on my Instagram. But we exercise 30 minutes a day, every single day. Sometimes it's walking, sometimes it's basketball, sometimes it's soccer, sometimes it's weight training. So we weight train pretty much every other day. And we're pretty intense about it at this point. But if it was an hour and a half or 2 hours, there's no way we could sustain it. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we got to the year mark, I was like, okay, we did it. She's like, let's do this for the rest of our life. And I had like a mini panic attack. I was like, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? And so we decided together as a couple, we decided, you know what, let's exercise every day for the rest of our life. And that doesn't mean we're going to go crazy. Sometimes it's nothing less than walking our dog, but we're going to exercise for at least 30 minutes. We set a timer every single day. And here we are almost 2 years later, and we've done it. It's brutal. Sometimes, I mean, 11 o'clock at night, it's the last thing we want to do in the entire world, but we do it.
Yeah.
And everyone, I think we just want to prove that it's possible. And now we have a bunch of other people on the team. The team has a bunch of people that are over a year. One of my team members did a full mile a day every day for over a year.
Wow.
So it's been really cool to have the community kind of rally underneath this.
It definitely shows if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. Like you talked about how you that fitness goal was 4 months. That was the initial talk and going off of 2 years. And similar to me, one of my kryptonites was fast food and eating
Same.
that. I've gone 2 years without even going to a fast food restaurant. I don't even think
Nice.
about it. I always joke with family and I'm like, oh, that looks so good on TV. But it never makes me want to actually get in my car and go get it. And so it kind of battle tests me in a way where I now cook. I mean, I love to cook. So I find ways to overcome those things. You are on with Next Level, the podcast scene. You are able to share your life, your experiences. What is something maybe people don't know about you that you enjoy doing when you're not working? Now, working may be fun to you, but what's something else that maybe people don't know that you like to do?
So I think actually recently people are starting to know because I've been sharing it, but I'm like the movie buff. I just adore movies. So one of my best friends growing up, his name was Ryan. He's a director now, and he just came out with a feature film not long ago. And he and I, when we were kids, we were obsessed with film. And I mean, we used to play the movie game at what actors in what movie, blah, blah. And I've just always been like a sneaky, obsessed with film. And it's my go-to. I now realize it was an escape. You know, when
Mhm.
things weren't going well with my family or things weren't going well in my academics or things weren't going well in my life, that was my escape for sure. And that I now realize it always gave me inspiration. Because what is a film? A film is a hero on a journey, having the courage to face and rise to the challenge.
Yep.
That's what a film is. And I don't, this whole idea of life is supposed to be easy and all that stuff, that is, to me, that's just false. The reason why these movies ignite our soul and our passion is because they are adversity.
Yeah.
Imagine a film, ready? There's three movies. The first movie is it starts off as an award ceremony. There's only success, and then at the end, there's an even bigger award ceremony. Congratulations, worst movie ever. Ready? Second worst movie ever. Rags, struggles, failures. Only rags, struggles, and failures, and even bigger failures and rags at the end. Second worst movie of all time. All of us know rags to riches, starting from the beginning and creating something meaningful. That's what life is about. There's nothing better on planet Earth than accomplishing your goals and your dreams. And the key is your goals and your dreams.
Yep.
When you get to the top of your metaphorical mountain and you can look back on your life and say, I did all I could with all I have, not just for me, but for others too. And I grew and contributed, and it was a meaningful life, even though it was absolutely brutal. I think that's better than, I kind of wish life was easier. I always try hard not to fall into that trap. Oh, I really wish it was easier. Why isn't starting a podcast easier? Why haven't we gone viral? All that stuff. It's just stupid, I think. I think you're better off just sticking with the tried and true fundamentals. And the last thing I'll say, this is kind of something I joke about with everyone. I said, I don't care if you're Joe Schmo, Jane Smith, John Smith, or Oprah Winfrey. All of us hate the Stairmaster the same. The Stairmaster sucks. It always has and it always will. But when you get off that thing, you have that moment of go me,
Yep.
go me. And that's how you build self worth and self belief and self respect and self love. Self love, you can't manufacture it. You have to earn it, and it has to be earned every day. And that's it. It's positive choices, positive discipline. It's self actualization, self belief, self respect, self discipline, all the self words, self love, self trust, all of it, right? And it sounds selfish, but it's not, because when you build the self, you are fulfilled. And when you're fulfilled, you don't hurt other people. You actually want to help other people. And it's only when you start letting yourself down that you end up with this huge ego that ends up being toxic toward others. And I've been there too. I get it. I had some toxic ego in my past. And the only way I was ever going to cure that is if I started building my self-esteem and my self-confidence and my self-belief and my self-worth and my self-discipline and my self-respect. And I started to actualize who I'm meant to be. And I think that if we lived in a world where everyone focused on that, that's a world I one day want to live in. And that's why I built my company based on that. And so to answer your question, I'm a huge movie buff. I'm obsessed with storytelling. I'm obsessed with film, particularly film. I think we're a little overdoing it with the shows these days. I like film, and I always have, and I think I always will. So, yeah.
The final question I'll ask you, for someone that's listening to this interview based on their journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
So the tip I would give is the simple fundamental that everything's a choice. And assuming you live in a free country, pretty much everything is a choice. And circumstances change. Some of us start from a more pleasant place than others. But I was born into a very adverse situation. My father died when I was 2, and my mom didn't know what she was going to do with 2 kids. My sister was very sick in the ICU when she was young. My stepdad left when I was 14, and we went from like, he got the yacht in the apartment building, and we got the home and the dog, to we went from Dreamcasts and boats and snowmobiles and all that stuff and vacations to basically, I don't know, I get free lunch at school now because our income is so low. He took 90% of the income with him. And I don't know how I'm going to go to college. I went from I can't wait to get into my dream college to I don't even know if I can go even if I do get in. And I shopped at Salvation Army and thrift stores. And, how are we going to keep our house in the family? So adversity is going to come no matter what. And there's 2 types of adversity. There's the adversity that life throws at you, and that's going to happen. Some of us to more than others. And then the second adversity is the one that you want. It's the one that comes with shooting high and going for your dreams and having the courage to do that. And I didn't realize this, but I chose both. And I think that ultimately you will get stronger and smarter. And eventually you'll be proud of who you are, and then you'll pass that to the next generation. So that's the last thing I would say is life is about choices, and there are constructive choices and there are destructive choices. Bad things are going to happen to all of us, but it's a choice what you do about it.
Alan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we are excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Thank you very much for having me. This was an honor. I adore, like I said, Rise to the Challenge. I knew as soon as I researched your show, I was like, this is going to be good. So yeah, keep fighting, everybody, for the best version of yourself every single day. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Tune in next time to hear my next guest talk about their rise to the challenge. Remember to follow and subscribe on all major audio platforms. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get a full-length episode in video format. What path do you take to accomplish your goals? You decide.